Hello, and welcome to episode number 11 of Heart Containers, a daily podcast where we discuss the latest Nintendo news every Monday through Friday. I'm your host, Rami Fawaz, and today is Monday, February 11th. I hope you guys had a great weekend. Mine was good, but also very hectic. I did not get to accomplish nearly half of the things that I really wanted to do, including participating in the latest Splatoon 2 Splatfest. I really wanted to represent Team Pancake, and I'm even more saddened by the fact that I missed out on the event because Team Pancake lost significantly. I mean, Waffle kind of single-handedly destroyed Pancakes in every single way that you can in the Splatfest rankings, and that makes me very, very sad. I feel very passionate about Pancakes. I discussed that last week, and I didn't get to play one of the last Splatfests that we're going to be able to participate in, Splatoon 2. So that's slightly unfortunate, but it's okay. I digress. That's really the only thing that I wanted to say before getting into what is going to be a very juicy episode. I mean, a lot of things happened this weekend. You can put your tinfoil hats on because we're going full blast on Nintendo Direct Watch 2019. That's right. There were so many rumors and leaks and whispers coming out in the last few days about a Nintendo Direct happening this week. Not only do we have a potential date that seems very credible, but we have games, we have potential announcements coming from multiple sources about all types of experiments that we're going to talk about in today's daily Nintendo report.
Well, the wait is over. This is Nintendo DS. My body is ready.
We would like to play.
A way to make 3D games a reality.
And it's called the Wii U Game Pen.
So the first story on the report, before we get into all the rumors and the leaks, let's start with something that's a bit more concrete, even though it's not officially announced. And I'll explain what I mean by that. GameStop Germany may have just revealed the existence of a Switch port for Spyro Reignited Trilogy. The game, which includes remasters of the first 3 titles in the Spyro series, was originally released in November of last year for the PS4 and Xbox One, with no official confirmation on whether or not it would eventually be brought over to the PC and the Nintendo Switch. This is not the first time the Switch version of this game has accidentally showed up as a public listing online, believe it or not. The same thing happened not once, but twice last year. Once on the official Spyro UK website. That's right, these aren't offshoot websites that are accidentally, pressing the Switch option when they're listing this new game. This is the official Spyro UK website. It had a Nintendo Switch kind of a drop-down option, I believe that's what it was, when they launched the website sometime last year, and again on the official Nintendo UK online store last year. So this Spyro Reignited Trilogy has popped up in multiple places at multiple time periods and has strongly hinted towards the Nintendo Switch version, and the latest of that is with GameStop Germany. The last time I checked, it is still up on GameStop Germany's website. They had not taken it down, whereas these other 2 examples of being on the Nintendo UK store and the Spyro UK store, they're no longer up there. You can't see those examples anymore. So they were fixed on those. They're still not fixed on GameStop Germany, although by the time you're listening to this, odds are it probably will be fixed. So the first gut reaction, there's probably something weird going on with UK. Like, what's up with the UK guys about not being able to shut their mouths about Spyro Reignited Trilogy? Spyro UK, Nintendo UK, come on guys, get your stuff together. Even if whether this is true or not, I mean, this should not be slipping so easily. Although I guess GameStop Germany, it wasn't GameStop UK. So something's happening in Europe where they can't stop talking about the Switch and Spyro Reignited Trilogy. I think that this is more than likely. I mean, the official Spyro website, the official Nintendo website, and GameStop, these are reputable sources. These are not sources that are easily going to make mistakes like this. And the consistency, the amount of times that we've seen it in different places at different time periods, I feel like this is more than likely. Not to mention, with last year, the success of Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy, which did come out on the Switch. And I mentioned Crash Bandicoot, if you don't know, because Crash Bandicoot is very similar to Spyro in many ways. One being that the IPs are both owned by Activision, They both harken from the old school PlayStation era. They were kind of mascots for Sony back in the day, but now Activision kind of controls it. And both of those franchises are going through somewhat of a renaissance, and they share a very similar fan base as well. So I feel like what you see with Crash Bandicoot is pretty telling for what you see with Spyro. Like the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy, I mean, is hand in hand very similar to the Spyro Reignited Trilogy. And I think because the Switch version of that game did particularly well, I don't have all of the data in front of me, but I did look up UK data because, again, something about UK, they're very talkative about this sort of stuff. Well, when it launched in the UK, not only did the Switch version almost eke out the Xbox One version in terms of launch, in terms of first week sales, it also very quickly became the fastest selling Switch title of 2018 when it came out. Now, obviously, it didn't maintain that title, and I'm only talking about UK specifically, but that is no easy feat. Well, I guess maybe it is, because Nintendo really didn't bring the big guns out till the second half of the year, well after Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy came out. But my point is, it sold well. All signs point to Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy selling well, and because of that, it probably has a lot to do with why we're seeing Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled, the kart racer that comes out this year, also coming to Nintendo Switch. I would also expect Spyro Reignited Trilogy to make its way onto the Switch at some point this year, and all of these listings kind of hint that to be the case. My question to you guys is, should I care? I've never been that much of a Spyro fan. I did play Crash a little bit back then, but even then, I wouldn't say that I am an expert, a connoisseur of Crash and Spyro. I appreciate those games. I think they have a lot of history, but my concern is, do those games stand the test of time? If I do pick it up when it does eventually come to Switch, because I fully believe that that's what's happening here, am I going to like it? Should I care about that? You let me know. The second story of the report has to do with more quarterly financial business. The final stop on the Nintendo quarterly financial train has finally arrived. Now that the third quarter results have been publicly posted, as well as the presentation and investor QA, the last bit of information that we were waiting for was for the Q&A session to be translated into English so that we could more accurately examine the meaning behind what was being said. Okay, so over these past couple of weeks, whether you were listening here on the show or anywhere where you get your Nintendo news, you may have seen this trickle of Nintendo headlines coming through, probably quotes from their president, Shintaro Furukawa, about the future of Nintendo, about sales figures, forecasts, investor type things happening over that time. And that's because they are wrapping up the third quarter and there's a bunch of information to get through. The very last thing that happens when they finish up a quarter is that they do this Q&A session with their investors. They allow their investors to ask them questions directly to a lot of the higher ups at Nintendo, which include Furukawa, as well as many others like Miyamoto as an example, basically representatives for the Nintendo company. And that information that comes out from the Q&A session, we get some of it, but we have to wait until it gets fully translated and posted in English until we can really understand what was said, the gravity of the situation, because again, translations can be messy. Sometimes something gets sent over and headlines are written when really the context make a whole lot of difference. So now that the Q&A session has been set to English, we're finally done with this quarterly financial stuff. We have all the information we need to kind of accurately assess how the third quarter went for Nintendo. And so that's kind of what this news story is all about. And that's also why you're probably seeing a whole bunch of headlines and other news stories that have followed this recent release of the English translation for the Q&A session. So if you're curious about reading the Q&A in its entirety, you can visit Nintendo's investor relations portal, where it's all easily accessible and ready to consume. But today I decided to go over just a handful of standout comments that had not yet been covered by my previous stories. So you can go look, I've talked about this multiple times. You can go back and listen to them if you're really curious about what I think about it, or you can go online, like I said, to the investor relations portal to see what they say about it. But I'm only going to talk about the new things that stood out to me that I think you guys should know about. So one of the things that was mentioned in a question regard to the decreased financial forecast from 20 million to 17 million Switches for the fiscal year. If you don't know this one, it's just that the whole company, so Shintaro Furukawa recently stated at the end of this third quarter announcement that they're going to lower their yearly forecast. They wanted to sell 20 million Switches for this fiscal year, and they lowered it to 17 million. And that's kind of upset, or at least piqued the interest of a lot of investors for why Nintendo kind of missed their mark. So of course, that was, I think, the very first question that was asked at this Q&A by investors. And this is how Furukawa responded, or at least a portion of the response that I thought was the most interesting. He said, quote, "As we look back so far for this fiscal year, we now evaluate that our efforts to fully convey the appeal of Nintendo Switch hardware and software to the number of new consumers we originally hoped to reach were insufficient," end quote. He continued and later expanded on this by mentioning the failure of selling more consoles in the first half of the year, specifically April to September, which is actually the part of the QA which we were able to discuss last week. The whole thing where he's thought that the failure of selling enough Switches in the first two quarters for financial quarters of the year were the reason why they had to lower the forecast. But the main quote that we got from the translation has to do with them not feeling that they were able to fully convey the appeal of Nintendo Switch hardware to new consumers. And what I take away from all of this, or for what Furukawa is saying about how they did in the first half of the year and not being able to convey the appeal of the Nintendo Switch, has a lot to do with Labo. That's my take with this. Labo is the game that really came out during that time period, during that April to September era. It was the game that was supposed to appeal to people who did not necessarily have a Switch at that time. Again, it was supposed to be for kids, or the kids at heart. That's how they advertised it. It was really supposed to convey the appeal of the Nintendo Switch more so than I think any other game that released in 2018. I mean, it is a game that only works for the Nintendo Switch, and it is also a title that did not perform particularly well, especially when you compare it to the other first-party titles. So when I look at this quote, what I take from it is that they feel like they put a lot of emphasis on Labo, and the failure of Labo, not as a concept, but just not reaching its full potential, is what I mean when I say failure, is the reason why they had to lower that forecast. That's what I read from that statement. The next very interesting bit from the Q&A regarded the steep decline in 3DS sales, where Furukawa responded by saying, quote, "Nintendo 3DS market has contracted faster than we anticipated," end quote. I just wanted to let you guys know about this one because it is clear that Nintendo thought the 3DS had a staying power that was well beyond 2018, maybe well into 2019, but all of a sudden they're seeing pretty bad sales, or at least sales that they did not expect to be seeing. A story that also came out this weekend that kind of pinpoints this, or has to do with this, is that Mario and Luigi sales, so the game that recently came out on 3DS, Mario and Luigi Bowser's Inside Story plus Bowser's Minions, I think that's what it is. It has like this ridiculously long title that I always forget about, but that game is apparently one of the worst selling Mario games in Japan's history. It just has abysmal sales, and I mean Mario games in terms of any game that kind of has Mario in the title, so including the spin-offs and stuff. Apparently this game has sold abysmally low. It's doing very, very poor, and it doesn't deserve to, because that game is a fun experience. It's just that's not what the Japanese audience is interested in. So it's clear that Nintendo has these expectations that the 3DS was going to have more staying power well into 2019, but that doesn't seem to be the case. So that's something I also glean from this Q&A session. The quote again was that the Nintendo 3DS market has contracted faster than we anticipated, end quote. And it seems like they're going to be taking actions to help that, whether that means they're going to revitalize the 3DS in some way, which I highly doubt, or those Switch Mini rumors are probably a lot more true than some doubters might think. Another thing, there was a lot of juicy conversations about Nintendo Switch Online. I just want to read this entire quote for you guys because it is full of great stuff. So, quote, "We are not disclosing details by each membership plan among consumers who have purchased memberships. However, a growing percentage is now opting for shorter plans like the 1-month membership. This is in contrast to the situation around the end of October of last year, when we reported that over half were opting for a 12-month family or individual membership. It is critical that these members want to continue using the service for a long time rather than letting it expire, and for that we need to build relationships with consumers and enrich the content. With this in mind, we are currently planning ways to boost the appeal of the service on a yearly basis. We will announce more details as soon as we are ready. End quote. Wow. Okay, a lot of stuff here about Nintendo Switch Online, and it's all really interesting. So the first bit explains how when Nintendo Switch Online launched last year in September, I believe that's when it came out. Yeah, that's when the full-blown announcement about what Nintendo Switch Online was going to be. They finally got these numbers in October, is what Furukawa is saying here, where they reported that over half of the people who opted into the service purchased the 12-month plan. That's me. I did that. And that's maybe many of you, because we didn't know what it was and it was very cheap buy-in. But what they're seeing now is that towards the end of the year, more and more people are actually going for the 1-month membership. And that is actually causing them some concern, because the 1-month membership, perhaps you only got the 1-month membership because you recently got a Switch and you wanted to play Super Smash Bros. Online or something like that. Well, that means that when you get tired of that game, the likelihood that you are going to not resub, that you're going to let it expire, is a lot higher than someone obviously who paid for the 12-month membership, who's in it for the long haul, who, like someone like me, who's going to go all the way back to next fall before I make another decision about whether or not I'm going to resub. And that's putting Nintendo in a bit of a hot seat. They kind of have to figure out very soon, or sooner rather than later, maybe perhaps sooner than they originally intended, how they're going to get these people who are only doing this 1-month membership to make sure that they stay. And it's very important to them. And that's why they say things like, we are currently planning ways to boost the appeal of the service on a yearly basis, and that it's incredibly important to them to enrich the content of Nintendo Switch Online. I expect, after reading all this, that we're going to hear some news about what they're doing with Nintendo Switch Online very soon. And I'm also very curious what they mean by a yearly basis. Is that something to do with maybe like a virtual console, or continuing to expand the selection of games onto the Switch on a yearly basis so that people continue to be a part of it? Maybe 2018 and 2019 was NES, but then you move on to SNES, and then you keep moving forward, N64, maybe you get the handhelds in there, GameCube, and if you keep doing that every year, you kind of add another layer of virtual console-ness to the subscription service. Well, that can work probably for a long time. I mean, that would keep me hooked if I knew that they were going to continue to do that over the years. Maybe that's what they mean by boosting the appeal of the service on a yearly basis. Whatever it might be, it definitely seems like they are going to be talking more about Nintendo Switch Online in 2019, and that they're going to be working hard on improving the appeal of that service. Lastly, I want to finish off with some news about DLC or expansions on games that are probably coming for anyone that's played Super Mario Party, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, or Super Smash Bros. Ultimate and wanted to see more coming to those games. So Satoru Shibata, a senior executive officer at Nintendo, had some very telling things to say about those titles in 2019. He said, quote, "Before their release, we challenged ourselves to see how we could expand our consumer base with each of these titles. For Super Mario Party, the question was, how could we reach people other than children and parents? With Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, we asked, how could we reach people who had played Pokemon Go, for example, but never played Nintendo Switch? And with Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, we asked, how could we reach not only fans of the Super Smash Bros. Series, but also those who had never played it before? If you look at the demographics of the consumers who purchased each of these titles, I'm not convinced we've completely overcome these challenges yet. So our aims are to keep working on them this year, to expand sales of these titles to new consumer demographics, and to keep selling these games for a long time, which is one of our strengths." End quote. So there was a lot there, but the point was they had these goals for all of their major first-party titles that came out near the end of last year, and they actually think they can do it a lot better. Despite, for instance, how well Super Smash Bros. Ultimate has sold, they think they can take it further. They do not believe that they've accomplished these goals, and you should expect to see more in 2019. At least that's what I take from it. So I know that I've seen a lot of chatter about, for instance, Super Mario Party, questions about, are we going to see more for that game? That game was kind of bare bones in terms of its feature set. After reading this, I'm more than convinced that 2019 will probably see DLC for Super Mario Party. It also looks like we're going to see more from Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. It's clear as day that they wanted that game to reach people who had played Pokemon Go, that's what they said, but had never played a Nintendo Switch before. I would imagine what that means for 2019, maybe DLC, but more likely just kind of bundling it more and more in the cheaper version. If there is a Nintendo Switch Mini then putting Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee out there to kind of bring people through the door, that's a great example of how they might appeal to new demographics, which again is what this quote was partially about. And lastly, Smash Brothers Ultimate, for them thinking that they had not necessarily, they're not convinced that they've overcome the challenges for that game is kind of strange because of how well that game has sold. I take that as they're going to continue with the DLC plan that they set forth, the 5-character DLC. They want to make sure that they nail it at least as much as possible in 2019 so that they can keep the hype train, keep the sales train for Smash Ultimate going well into 2019. So those, I tried just to take a handful of things. There's so much more in the Q&A session, but if I went through every single part of it, we'd be talking about it all day. If you're interested in any of these stories or any more, or any hints about what else they talked about in Nintendo in Nintendo's Q&A session that's been translated, I encourage you to go online or reach out to me, because I have read it multiple times just trying to make sure that I understood what the heck Nintendo is talking about. Reach out to me, go forth and read it, but we're going to finish up with this segment because we have so much more to talk about. All right, the third story of the report, Emily Rogers returns. Last week, we mentioned a story about the infamous Emily Rogers, a game journalist, Nintendo leaker who's had her fair share of both truths and follies. So Rogers hinted at 8 to 11 unannounced Nintendo published Switch titles arriving in 2019, and on Sunday, she decided to expand a bit more on what she meant by that. If you did not catch that story, I encourage you to check out last Wednesday's show where we covered the original leak, because today I only want to talk about the new bits of information she revealed on her blog post about what's to come for the Nintendo Switch. First, she predicted that a 4th Nintendo Labo kit would be arriving as early as April of this year, and said that the new kit's name and gimmick might surprise people. Next, she strongly hinted that we should all be paying attention to Platinum Games, the developer of Bayonetta 3, as Rogers seems to believe that they are working on another Switch 2019 project that is unrelated to Bayonetta. She's very confident about this. Apparently, she's hinted at keeping our eyes on Platinum Games for a while now. And again, 2019 seems to be the year, even though 2019 doesn't seem to be the year for Bayonetta 3 at all. So there must be some secret project that's going on in Platinum. We'll talk about that in a second. And lastly, she just kind of confirmed a few things that she already mentioned from last week. So 3 of the 4 unannounced mystery projects will apparently be eShop titles, and she has a high confidence that at least 8 of the 11 will be talked about in some way, shape, or form in 2019. That's all very vague and mysterious. We kind of went into that last week if you want to get my full opinion on that stuff. So I'm going to focus on the new bits, which was the Nintendo Labo kit. Makes sense. They still want to support it. They still see it as something that appeals to a wider audience. And I think because the 3DS is doing poorly, the Switch is likely to take over that market in 2019, and Labo has so much potential to helping that. I mean, if you get a Switch at a lower price point and all of a sudden you can get into the Labo ecosystem at a lower price point, that might explode. That might be the chain reaction necessary to make Labo catch on in the way that I'm sure Nintendo originally hoped that it would. It does not surprise me that it's coming out as early as April. That's the start of the next financial year. So again, they want to get that out as early as possible. I'm curious to know what this new name and new gimmick might be that's going to surprise people, because Labo already surprised people just by being such a unique twist on what a game could be and playing with cardboard. So I wonder what they're going to do. I always really wished that they perhaps kind of connected it with an actual game. Like at one point they let you play Labo, let it make a steering wheel, and they connected that with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. So I wonder if it's going to be something like that, like more connectivity with games that we already have. But again, I don't know. I wouldn't say that would surprise me. So I'm very interested to see what she's talking about in this regard. And the next new thing that we kind of learned from this blog post was Platinum Games. What is Platinum Games up to? Why is Rogers pushing it so heavily? Emily Rogers, that is. Why is she pushing it so heavily? A game that isn't Bayonetta 3. This could be anything, really. If you don't remember, Platinum Games also worked on Nintendo properties, including Star Fox Zero, a controversial game, but no matter what you think of Star Fox Zero, Platinum Games has the ability and has the relationship with Nintendo to work on some first-party IPs. So I'm actually I don't know what this is going to be, but we're bound to find out about it sooner rather than later. This mystery project is a game that's likely to come out before Bayonetta 3, a game that, even though we've heard about it for over a year now, Nintendo still has it listed as to be determined for the date, and that was the same case for Metroid Prime 4. It could just mean that they haven't announced Bayonetta 3, but I'm reading that as nope, don't expect it. Just pay attention to what this might be. I'm curious for you guys to let me know what you think Platinum Games might be working on. But this is the extent that I want to get into Emily Rogers' conversations, because I think it actually folds into the last story. Nintendo Direct Watch is on high alert this week, as another prominent Nintendo leaker that isn't Emily Rogers let slip that this Wednesday, February 13th, may finally be the day when Nintendo breaks their 2019 Direct silence. Coming from Reset Era user King Zell, he hopped onto a Reset Era Nintendo Direct speculation thread to say, quote, 13 is your lucky number, and I'm out, end quote. He also returned to the thread to mention a couple of other tidbits about the upcoming Direct, saying that Metroid Prime Trilogy will, quote, probably be there, end quote, and that Nintendo, I don't think that was an actual quote. He used the word probably, but he didn't use probably be there. I want to make that clear. Those are my words. So he said, quote, probably, end quote, be there. And then Nintendo has a number of games to announce in 2019 that may or may not make its way into this February Direct. And then he went on to list all the games that he firmly believes are coming in 2019, or that he suspects will be coming in 2019, including Pikmin 3, Super Mario Maker 2, some sort of Box Boy experience, 2D Zelda, and Pokemon, which again, we've know about Pokemon. He also mentioned more third-party support, and he thinks that we're especially going to hear a lot from Japanese third-party specifically. So as if we weren't hearing a lot from Capcom bringing Resident Evil 4 over and Square Enix bringing every single Final Fantasy game known to man over, I guess we're about to hear more in 2019. Now, who is King Zell? Well, Zell, he has a fairly positive track record over the past few years. He correctly predicted the World Ends With You final remix, Pokemon Let's Go Eevee, Let's Go Pikachu reveal events, Animal Crossing, that announcement, and the Indie Highlights video that was published just last month. So there's definitely something to be considered here. He does have credibility, and recent credibility, that is. So I'm going to take this with a heavy microscope. I'm going to look at it and treat this as if it could be very much legit. I actually very much buy into this. The timing seems right for a Nintendo Direct. Let's start there. The timing seems absolutely right. I've been thinking about this recently, especially with the news about the third party or the third quarter financials. We are just at a time period where all of that news is kind of done. Like, Nintendo announced all of these things, they let it percolate for all of January and some of February, and now that we've all had it, distilled, and we've chewed on it and we've consumed it, and we've had some time to think about what they've talked about in the past month and a week or so, we're ready to move forward. And I think that's actually very smart for Nintendo, because it might not seem that way, but they actually announced or talked about a lot of negative stuff over this past month. We heard about the Metroid Prime 4 reboot / delay, conversation, which in Nintendo's eyes could have gone very negatively, although I feel like for most people they saw that in a positive light. But from Nintendo's perspective, that was a negative announcement. They didn't want to announce something like that, and yet they had to. Then they went forward and announced that Mario Kart Tour also going to be delayed, a game that a lot of people had their eyes on in the mobile space as being potentially Nintendo's biggest and greatest mobile initiative, besides Pokemon Go, but that's not even a Nintendo developed thing. So Mario Kart Tour had a lot of pressure on it, and it got delayed as well. So two major games, one with a lot of financial potential and one with a lot of fan credit, immediately getting announced in January that, hey, nope, forget about it. Let's not talk about it. It's not coming. Or in the first month of the year. Then we have this latest 3DS news, and 3DS sales being lower than expected, and they're not making their forecasts, not only on the 3DS side of things, because it's not selling as well as expected, but with the Switch not being able to hit that 20 million ambitious goal and lowering down to 17 million. So all of these conversations were happening in the first month or so of the year, and that means there's been a lot of discussions with fans and investors and like all across the board. Everyone has something to gripe about if they wanted to about Nintendo, and it makes a lot of sense to let that information sit out there, let it have its time to shine so that it doesn't overshadow other information. And the more I think about that, the more I think about how they kind of want you, okay, like let's forget about Metroid Prime 4. Let's forget about this 20 million to 17 million forecast drop. Like, yes, you talked about it. Let give it its time so that we can move on and let the actual good news come out. Let the good news shine and have people can forget about what's going on. And I think Metroid Prime Trilogy, which is something that Zell says we're probably going to see in this Nintendo Direct this week, is a great example of that. The original rumor with Metroid Prime Trilogy was that it was supposed to be announced in December of last year. It wasn't. Why not? Well, if it was announced in December, obviously the next question that everyone would be having is, when is Metroid Prime 4 coming then? Like, we want to find out more about Metroid Prime 4. And the very next story Nintendo would have to talk about is, oh, I'm sorry, Metroid Prime 4 has been delayed. So that's a bummer. And that kind of muddies up the excitement for Metroid Prime Trilogy. But now that Metroid Prime 4 has kind of gotten out of the news and had its day in the sun, and everyone got to think about what that means when Metroid Prime Trilogy, if it finally gets announced, hopefully this Wednesday at this, potential Nintendo Direct, it's going to be the talk of the town. No one is going to be asking questions like, but Metroid Prime 4. No, Metroid Prime Trilogy is going to shine in its own right. And I think that's really smart. And that's why I'm buying into these Nintendo Direct rumors, or this specific one, because now that we're done with the Q&A, we're done with all this negativity potentially that has come out over this past month and a half. They're ready to start talking about it. They have to start getting this information out, not just for the fans, but in anticipation to the next financial quarter. I mean, the financial year ends at the end of March, so we're already mid-February. You kind of have to start talking about what investors need to get excited about for 2019, and this would be the perfect time period. So I totally buy into this. I think there's a lot of credibility, not just because King Zell has respect or he's gotten things right in the past, but also because it makes a lot of sense from Nintendo's perspective. Metroid Prime Trilogy, we've heard a lot of rumors. I totally buy into that. Pikmin 3, of course, that would be not Pikmin 4, the game that may never come out, even though Nintendo or Miyamoto said it was close to being done years ago. Pikmin 3 is the re-release of the Wii U game that came out in 2013. That also makes sense. Why does that make sense? Last week we talked about Emily Rogers and her games that she thought was going to come out, and she said one of them was going to be a Wii U port from 2013. So that aligns pretty well with his Pikmin 3 idea. Super Mario Maker 2, I totally want to see that. I've heard so many people say that Super Mario Maker might be the Wii U port that we should expect because it's so good. Why would you let that game kind of die off on the Wii U when it would fit really well on the Switch? But we haven't seen it thus far. So it makes a lot of sense that instead of porting it, they've been working on a sequel. My only question mark is we haven't really gotten any new Mario games since Mario Maker, really 2D games. So I feel like they might be missing out on like new content to play with in Mario Maker, but I'm sure they had tons of ideas, hopefully expanding the online capabilities of that game. And it makes sense why we'd be seeing a sequel. Box Boy experience or eShop experiences, totally. That again goes back to Emily Rogers. That's why I want to talk about Emily Rogers earlier. Her saying that we're going to see 3 to 4 eShop games. Well, that's exactly what Box Boy is. It makes sense that this is something that they would be talking about. 2D Zelda, I've talked about 2D Zelda in the past. Anuma has already confirmed that they're working on it. He confirmed that years ago that they did not merge the top-down Zelda. I prefer top-down because they're technically not 2D. The top-down Zelda team and the 3D Zelda team, they're still separate. And he also said that they were both working on the Switch. So this game is guaranteed to be coming. It just makes sense that they might be coming this year. That would actually be really cool, especially because I anticipate what they'll do with Breath of the Wild is that they will kind of do a Majora's Mask style sequel. They'll keep the engine, they'll keep a lot of the similarities, but they'll maybe change the setting and stuff, which means that we're probably not going to have to wait a huge generational gap to see a sequel to Breath of the Wild. It's probably only 1 or 2 years out from this point. So if they wanted to release a third Zelda game, and not a third, but a top-down Zelda game in the meantime, this would probably be the perfect time period, 2019, the perfect middle ground in between those two. It's 2 years after Breath of the Wild, and I would anticipate that near the end of the Switch's lifespan, or the end half of the Switch's lifespan at least, 2 years from now, so 2021, we would see a Breath of the Wild sequel. This is the perfect middle ground. This seems to be the best spot to put in a top-down Zelda. I'm all for that. He also said Pokemon. I don't know. Again, he didn't say that all these games would be talked about in the February Direct. Pokemon, I feel like, is the game that won't be talked about. Maybe a title will be shown off, but Pokemon has always kind of had its own time to shine. I don't see why they would kind of throw it in with all these other things. He also mentioned third-party support. Maybe that goes into the Spyro thing we were talking about earlier. Maybe it goes into Assassin's Creed 3 collection, what we talked about last week. There's all of these possibilities. Regardless, we will know very, very soon. Nintendo usually announces that a direct is happening a day or two before the direct. And since the direct is supposed to be on Wednesday, expect to hear something from them Monday or Tuesday. This is really big, very important. I fully buy into this. Let's see how depressed I can really get if I'm talking to you guys on Wednesday and we got absolutely nothing. But I think there's hope. I'm going to hold out hope for this. And that brings me in to today's question of the day. So the question of the day for episode number 11, Monday, February 11th is, out of all of the rumored titles said to be releasing in 2019, so the games that we've been talking about, Pikmin 3, Super Mario Maker 2, this Platinum game, top-down Zelda, all of the rumored ones, the unannounced ones but are rumored and being talked about by these leakers, by, whatever you want to call them, which game do you want to be real the most? Which game do you want to exist the most out of all of them? For me, I think the game I would want to really be real is Metroid Prime Trilogy. Again, you probably thought I would say top-down Zelda. The reason why I don't say that is because I'm very confident that game exists. I mean, Anuma saying that they exist is more than enough for me. Metroid Prime Trilogy, although it's been kind of heard through the grapevine, is a game that I can totally see never coming out. I can totally see it just being like mishmash rumors that were kind of misheard or were spread falsely because the community wants a Metroid Prime Trilogy, but it never really happened. But Metroid Prime Trilogy is a game that deserves to be in more hands. It deserves to be played because Metroid Prime 2 and 3 are games that were not played nearly enough as they should have been. I mean, there's no doubt that Prime 1 is the superior of the trilogy. That's my opinion, so I guess I wouldn't say no doubt, but Prime 1 is the superior, but Prime 2 and 3 are still fantastic games, and it would suck to not introduce the Switch's audience, the audience that is pining for a Metroid Prime 4, that wants to buy high-quality first-party games to be able to play Metroid Prime Trilogy. So I would be crushed if that was a game that did not get talked about, that actually didn't come in 2019 or never came. So I want that game to be the most real. And that's all I had scheduled for today's show. Remember, if you want to answer the question of the day, which was, again, out of all the rumored titles we talked about that are supposed to be coming out in 2019, or ones that we haven't talked about but still rumored, which game do you want to be real the most? Which game do you actually want to exist? And also, if you want to throw a wrench in there, which game do you think has the highest probability of being real? Although, I mean, that's probably not as difficult. So which one do you want to see real the most? There are multiple ways you can reach out to me, or if you want to just do more than talk about the question of the day, if you want to submit your own question, if you have feedback, opinions, any other types of discussions, you can reach me at heartcontainerspodcast@gmail.com or on Twitter. I have at HCNintendo, that's the official Heart Containers Twitter account, or at RomeFawaz on Twitter. This has been Heart Containers episode number 11 for Monday, February 11th. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you real soon.